Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Blacklogic. Before we get started, let's really strip the emotions out of this and deal in some facts because facts don't flinch when you call them the names. So, for years, Americans were told to trust the system, to trust the nonprofits, to trust the paperwork, to trust the audits. And while working families were clocking in, struggling with rent, rationing groceries, and paying taxes they couldn't afford, billions were being ciphered out of programs designed to protect the most vulnerable. Not millions, ladies and gentlemen, but billions from Somali scammers and a Kenyan scammer. We're going to cover that right here this evening because federal prosecutors in Minnesota didn't use soft language. They call it staggering. They call it industrial scale. And when prosecutors stop menacing words, it means that the evidence is overwhelming. This wasn't one rogue operator. This wasn't a paperwork error. This wasn't an ecosystem. Fake companies billing for services never provided. Invoices rubber stamped, regulators overwhelmed and intimidated. And when concerns were raised, the system froze. The question is why? Why do we ask that question? Because enforcing the rules suddenly became politically risky. State agencies saw red flags early. Invoices didn't make any sense. The number of feeding sites exploded overnight. These are $18 billion ring of immigrants inside of our country, unfortunately from the country of Somalia and Kenya. They was robbing autism diagnosis that were multiplied at statistical impossible rates. And instead of hitting pause, leadership hit mute. Why? And a lot of you are going to blame those liberals, I know, but because accusations of bias became more dangerous than theft. And you guys really need to let that sink in for a moment. Because according to federal indictments, money intended to feed hungry children didn't just vanish. It was converting into cash shipments, wire transfers, and foreign real estate investments. Apartment buildings in Nairobi, land near international borders, bankers' boxes stacked with hundreds of thousands of dollars. Photos were exchanged. Text celebrated wealth. The richest 25-year-old alive, one message read. This wasn't desperation. This was confidence. Confidence that the system wouldn't stop them. Confidence that oversight was optional, and confidence that American taxpayers would never see the receipts. And while prosecutors stress there is no evidence tying these funds to terror organizations, let's be crystal clear. Misusing public funds is still theft, no matter where the money lands. What makes this worse is just fraud. It's the silence that allows it, that all of these prosecutors and lawmakers were very silent over 14 states, $18 billion. So when oversight agencies backed down, they didn't just lose money, they lost credibility. When political leaders hesitated, they didn't preserve harmony, they preserved impunity. And the fallout isn't isolated to just Minnesota. This becomes a national issue because every state uses the same federal pipelines, Medicaid, USDA programs, housing assistance, disability services. If oversight collapses in one state, the blueprint spreads. That's why this matters, not because of where the defendants come from, not because of who votes for whom, but because any system that can be gamed at this scale, it will be. Because fraud doesn't care about ideology. It only cares about opportunity. And the opportunity existed because regulators were afraid to enforce the rules. Because the reason why this really doesn't matter what country, let's not forget about Brent Favre, that 1.1 million that he allegedly stole from the welfare ring right there in Mississippi. This isn't about demonizing communities. It's about demanding standards, because every dollar stolen from a child nutrition program is a dollar a real child never ate. Every fraudulent autism claim delays services for families who desperately need them. Every housing scam leaves vulnerable people without shelter. That's the real cost of this. And until enforcement becomes non-negotiable, until audits mean audits and accountability means consequences, this story won't be an exception. It'll just be a warning. So let's get something straight before anyone starts yelling at the screen and leaving hate comments in my comment section. I'm not talking about all Somalis. I'm not talking about all Kenyans. And I'm not talking about all the Brent Favres in the world. I'm talking about those who were accused and those who will be prosecuted on the crimes they have committed of robbing American taxpayers out of $18 billion. This story is not about immigration as an identity. This is not about religion. This is not about skin color. It's about power, policy, and a system that collapsed under the weight of its own cowardice. Because what federal prosecutors uncovered in Minnesota is not a scandal. It's a case study in how America loses billions without firing a single shot. Since 2018, roughly $18 billion in Medicaid claims flowed through 14 state-run programs flagged at high risk. And federal investigators now say half of more of these claims may be fraudulent. And that's not a typo. That's not speculation from cable news. This is the U.S. Attorney's Office putting numbers on papers. And the fraud didn't stop at the borders. Money intended for hungry children, autistic kids, people with disability, housing stabilization didn't just get scammed. It was laundered. It was wide abroad, converted into luxury real estate, stored in banker boxes of cash. This wasn't desperation fraud. This was corporate-style criminal enterprise. And federal prosecutor called it staggering, okay? They call it an industrial scale, no less. And those words really matter because prosecutors don't use them very lightly. Let's talk about feeding our future. The federal child nutrition program exists because Congress recognized something very basic. Kids can't learn when they're hungry. This is something very simple for most people to understand, I would like to believe. But between 2020 and 2022, defendants allegedly submitted fake meal counts, fabricated invoices, and phantom feeding sites claiming to feed tens of thousands of children who never showed up. Let me give you some more receipts on this so we can really chime in. I might be helpful if I can share the screen here with you guys as I'm live. Thank you guys for joining me here this evening.
Good morning, Jen. Thanks for having me.
You know, this fraud was uncovered years ago and the indictments were made during the Biden administration. So how widespread is this? What have you uncovered?
Yeah, so there's the three schemes that we know of, right? There's one of the larger schemes is the Feeding Our Future group. They submitted fraudulent reimbursement claims and fake documentation. They claimed to be feeding poor children. They were not feeding them. They were getting money through the USDA. Then there's the autism program fraud, where the leader approached parents in the Somali community to recruit their children. And each child that qualified for these fake autism services, they paid kickbacks to the parents. That was used, they used Medicaid to pay those. And then there was the housing scheme. They were, purporting to find homes for people with disabilities or the elderly. But, the allegation there is that was a massive scheme to defraud that program as well. And so 59 people so far have been convicted in these schemes. Prosecutors say more than $1 billion in taxpayer money has been stolen through these three plots. We should note that they're not done in charging the head of the autism fraud scheme. The prosecutor said it's just the first in the ongoing investigation. It's not isolated. Of course, each case that they bring exposes another strand in the network.
Right. And to your point, will state leaders like Governor Tim Walz be held accountable? How much culpability do they have?
Yeah, as the New York Times put it, in 2020, the Minnesota Department of Education, they were noticing that they administered the children's meals programs, and they became overwhelmed by the number of applicants for feeding sites to feed children meals. And they began raising questions about the invoices they were getting. So the fraudulent group Feeding Our Future, they threatened a lawsuit. They said, well, we're going to accuse you of racism, and it will be sprawled across the news. And so they backed off. A report from the nonpartisan Minnesota Office of the Legislative Auditor looked at this. They later found.
It's quite funny to me that they accuse them of racism, kind of using Black American struggle to solidify their $18 billion scam ring. Have you guys really noticed that? Let's go a little bit deeper here. In case you guys want to reference, I always want to give you guys the invoices so you can go reference this for yourself. Now, in this particular IRS filing here is only referencing one Kenyan, but it could be connected to other Kenyans in Nairobi because, again, a lot of the money that has been scammed went to a luxury apartment in Kenya. So, of course, there's other people involved, but there was only one main character in this particular story. Now, it states here that federal prosecutors in Minnesota announced in December that an estimated half or more of the roughly $18 billion in claims paid out by Medicaid to 14 state run program since 2018, with significant amounts of money sent to countries including Kenya. The majority of the defendants in the related schemes are Somali Americans. So when they say Somali Americans, my mind automatically goes to that these were citizens of America that are from Somali, from the country of Somalia. Or were these naturalized? Were these on people on H-1B visas, work visas, student visas, Einstein visas? What type of visa were they on? Were they permanent residents? What status were they? I believe all the details matter. No less, a lot of these people are not originally from America. Thus, they're scamming America. And then again, just for some balance, I don't want to leave out Brent Favre. No, Brent Favre is implicated in Mississippi massive welfare fraud scandal, accused of misusing millions in federal aid meant for the poor, though he denies wrongdoing. It hasn't been criminally charged. He alleged received 1.1 million for speeches he never gave and pushed for 5 million. Ladies and gentlemen, that's not what this is about. I'm just providing a little bit of balance. But when it comes to this, over 40 million from that one program alone was misappropriated. And where did it go? Now, according to the indictments, real estate purchases in Nairobi, land acquisition near international borders, cash transfers labeled as family support, shell corporations, bulk cashing smuggling, photos exist, text messages exist, bank records exist. This isn't rumor, it's evidence. And feeding our future wasn't isolated. Investigators expanded into housing stabilization services, autism intervention programs, integrated community support for disabled adults. In the autism scheme, children were allegedly recruited, diagnosed, inflated, or fabricated, and the kickbacks paid to parents while Medicaid footed the bill. That means you and my American tax dollars were going for people who allegedly are Somali Americans and supposedly one Kenyan. Again, not all Somalis in Minnesota, not all Somalis in New Orleans, but enough to gain the attention of $18 billion of our tax dollars going into their pockets. See, that matters because Medicaid is not monopoly money. Medicaid is your paycheck, your payroll taxes, your deductions, your labor. And here's a part that should make everyone very uncomfortable, in my opinion, regardless of the politics. Regulators saw red flags early. They saw it. They saw that something was up, something was wrong. The Minnesota Department of Education noticed exploding application and possible service volumes, invoices that didn't add up. So what happened? So instead of enforcement, they hesitated. And why? Because the organizations under scrutiny threatened lawsuits. They threatened accusations of discrimination. They threatened media backlash. And according to the report, what we just heard, they claim racism out of all things. And you have over 100,000 Somalis in Minnesota. Your congresswoman is from Somali. Some of the state representatives are from Somali. So again, it may be bigger than what we actually think. I'm not trying to start a conspiracy theory, but again, $18 billion. Oh yeah, you only caught 15 Somalians and 1 Kenyan? No, I believe there's a lot more people than that, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, there's a lot more people than that because oversight agencies backed off. And I want you really guys to let this sink in because the fear of political fallout outweighed the duty of protect the public funds. They wasn't even thinking about your tax dollars. That's not a partisan failure. That's a governance failure. And it didn't just cause money. And I know it happened all under the liberals because a lot of this actually started under Joe Biden. See, why Joe Biden, and I know people are going to hate when I say this, had those open door policies and we had millions of legal immigration and millions of illegal immigration. Now, not let me forget that the Haitian woman who was a congresswoman, I believe, she supposedly and allegedly, and people say that that's already been proven, that she stole $5 million from FEMA. Okay. And then the Fugees rapper, I forgot who was also from Haiti. I'm not picking on the Haitians today, guys. I'm only picking on the 2 criminals from Haiti. He also was funneling money supposedly to the Obama campaign. So again, this damages public trust. It diverted resources from legitimate families. It created a precedent that if you're loud enough or legitimate enough, enforcement really stops. Okay. Now, let's address that part that everyone dances around, because federal prosecutors stated that 82 of the 92 defendants charged so far are Somali Americans. Again, federal prosecutors stated that 82 of the 92 defendants charged so far are Somali Americans. That statistic is not an accusation, it's a demographic fact in a specific set of cases. And facts don't become racist just because they're uncomfortable. That's just the tell of the tape. That's just the truth of the matter. And at the same time, prosecutors have been explicit. There is no evidence that stolen funds were used to support terrorist organizations, thank God, not yet. And that clarification really matters, and it's been repeated for a reason. But here's what also matters. Stealing from American social program is still theft. Laundering money abroad is still a felony. Defrauding Medicaid is still a federal crime. And the political paralysis surrounding enforcement made it very possible. This isn't new in American history. The U.S. repeatedly learned the hard way that when oversight is weakened, accountability is politicized, and audits are treated as optional, fraud explodes. This is what usually happens in America. That's why the IRS Criminal Investigation Division exists. That's why healthcare fraud statute carried decade-long sentencing. That's why federal forfeiture laws are aggressive, because one public trust collapses, the system itself becomes the target. And this story doesn't stop in Minnesota. As I stated before, every state uses similar federal pipelines. Every state relies on self-reported billing. Every state faces political pressure when enforcement intersects with identity politics. That's why this case matters nationally, not because of who the defendants are, but because of what happens when rules are no longer enforced evenly. And when oversight dies, theft thrives. And until enforcement becomes non-negotiable, until audits are audits, laws are laws, and accountability doesn't pause for optics, this will happen again. It may be in a different state, different community, but the same outcome. This isn't about demonizing anyone. It's about protecting. It's about protecting children who actually need food, families who actually need services, taxpayers who actually fund the system. Because the moment Americans believe that the safety net is just a global ATM, the entire structure will collapse. You want to know why America is $38 trillion in debt? Well, we can definitely account of 82 Somali Americans and at least a couple of Kenyans helping with that debt that America owes to itself and probably some entities in China. Everyone loses, ladies and gentlemen. That's not rhetoric. That's history. And this is Blacklogic. You guys have a great and wonderful night. I'll see you guys tomorrow.